All right, welcome to the Thursday edition of the Lunch and Learn. I'm going to be kind of hosting here along with Tyler. I'm Corey Anderson. I'm part of the proof of concept team on the pre-sales side, and Tyler is part of our sales engineering team. So are there any questions that we want to dive into as we get started here on the Lunch and Learn? Feel free to raise your hand or submit them as questions in the Q&A channel. All right, looks like we have a question. I am looking to create a process that will list files in a directory on the C drive where Decisions is installed. I can get it to list the files, but I cannot figure out what step to use in my form to display the entire list. Okay, so that's great that you have that you've gotten that far to list them out. Maybe if you give me a better idea of what you mean by listing them out on a form, maybe that could be a good place to start there.
So what I'm intending to do is we have our development environment is actually hosted at Decisions. So we don't have a network setup for our own internal company. So I'm trying to mimic that by using a directory on the C drive where Decisions is installed. I know that I can write files out to there. I know that I can create directories, delete them, all that kind of stuff. Through various tickets and discussions with the support team, we've gotten that to work. So there is an existing directory on one of your servers that we have been using for testing. It's got files in it. I need to know what those files are so that I can then start manipulating them to do the test that I want to do.
Okay.
Since it's not my server, I obviously can't go to a prompt or, whatever. I need to use the steps within Decisions, and I don't know how to get it to tell me what the files are.
Gotcha. And when you say, what the files are, I think we're limited to just getting back just the file name and the file path of them. But we can walk through together how to go about doing those steps.
Okay. That'd be great.
Okay. Can you see my decision screen?
I can't.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and create a flow. And in the steps toolbox, look for in integration, we'll go to file, and we'll go to list files in directory.
Right, got that.
So you got that, and we'll just call this, let me make a quick folder in my C drive here. Test. And then the output of this step is a list of files that have their network or their drive location in them as well. So I'll have a new text document. I'll put a rich text file in there and a zip file. All right, so now if I debug this, should return a list of 3 files of these 3 things.
Okay.
And you want to be able to see on a form how to show that text list in something that's displayable and actionable. So
it doesn't need to be actionable. Well, I mean, that'd be fine. I can make it actionable, but it doesn't, I wasn't looking originally for it to be actionable, just displayable.
Okay.
I can get it to display, first or last, but not the whole list.
Yep. Gotcha. Okay, so there's two different components that we could use here. And both deal with displaying arrays of data. So when we have a list of data coming in, we want to have some type of repeating element within decisions to display this type of data. Since what we're looking at here is a string list, which is a very, a native data type or a very basic decision, a data type within decisions, what we can use is what we can call a list box. So if I drop over this list box, it's going to say list items data name. This is going to be file names. Type here, we can just have as a string. We want the output to be a single select. We could have that either single select or multiple select. And then we can determine out how we want to have those selected items output from this list. And I can drag over my button to have an outcome. So when I click this button, the selected row or the selected item within this list is going to be output as the selected file name. So now I can click close and save from this form. And I'll drag the button to the end step, and I'll have my file names, select from flow, and this is going to be that list that I'm getting from that list files in directory step. The selected file I'm going to set to ignore because I'm not going to worry about that just yet. Now, when I debug this flow, we'll have there's 3 come out from that list files in directory, and I can select which one I want to either do something on or progress further with. So if I click on new text document and click button, I'll see the input to this form is going to be those 3 items. The output's also going to be those 3 items, but I also have that selected item that I can do something with. And so this is, not only how to display items in a directory, but also how to say, okay, I want to do something further on this one.
Perfect. That's what I needed. I actually did try that step, but I didn't remove what I had out there already. So I was confused as to what it was I needed to do with it. But that answers my question.
Perfect. Any other questions that we want to dive into today? Absolutely. I see a question about asking a question. Absolutely, you can ask a question. All right. Question is, I'm looking for examples or guidance. I am trying to build a generic module for executing a regex expression for a list of items in an array. So the array will contain 2 columns, the value and the expression. I will then iterate through the array and execute the regex step using the value and the expression. I don't know how to create the array. I do not know how to create the array. I do not think I can use entities as I cannot use the same array in a multi-user environment. I'm hoping to create the array dynamically by populating the rows based upon the flow, then running the ForEach Element Flow and connecting a regex step to the next endpoint. Any guidance or direction would be appreciated. Absolutely. And there's a couple different ways that we can approach this. If you have an example of those key value pairs where you have the value and the regex expression, if you can pop those into the chat or into the question box, we can dive into that directly, or I can, kind of fumble through trying to bring up an example myself. All right, I'll give you a minute. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna close out of that. Name this flow. Create a new flow. Okay. So my regex here is going to be one is user ID, and the regex contained on that is going to be an expression here. So is the list or the array of the key value pairs that you're passing in, the key, the user ID, is that the column at which you want to perform that regex on that data set? So you want to say on the user ID column for a particular table within a database, I want to perform this regex expression against that column. Okay. While there'll be two columns, value and the regex. Okay. Well, let's start with first how to perform a regex on some values here. So first, I'll drag over regex replace and the regex match step. So are we using this regex to, and feel free to come on and unmute if you think that that will provide a little bit more guidance here. But are we using this regex to validate the user ID in the email? Are we using it to replace the strings within the within that column itself? Mic does not work. Okay. So we'll just say that if it matches, then we'll go true. If it does not match, we'll go false. So here we'll have our key. We're just going to go for one item in the array, and then we can go and talk about looping it here in a minute. So regex. So key is going to be user ID. The regex be this value. And the input says the key, The pattern is going to be that regex. And we can have a true false or a true path and a false path. So if it evaluates false, we can go to a logging step. And if it evaluates true, we'll just go to the end step. We can debug. Go. So actually, I think I'm missing part of this question. Like with the key here, the key being the user ID, are we trying to add or trying to accept, like assess, like use a query to say, okay, grab all of the user IDs for a particular table and then perform this regex on that particular column in the table? The input would be a value 1, 2, 3. Okay. So 1, 2, 3 matches that regex criteria. And if we change that to be, say, 1, 2, 3, something like this, it probably would not match that criteria. And we would go down the false path. So that would be right. But your question mainly comes in with, okay, I have this list of key value pairs. So let me build up another flow here that's going to take in, I'll create data here. How am I going to make? And for this, I'm going to make a wrapper for this type of input, which is going to be, this is going to be my regex evaluation wrapper. So this is, I'm putting together what is called a flow structure. So a flow structure you can think of as an envelope for your data. It's not database stored or database persisted in any way. It's just a way so that when I'm creating an array or creating a piece for my data, I can create an array of, or a list of related items and keep those values distinct and joined in this one way. So this is going to be my regex evaluation wrapper, which is going to have my key, which we can have as this will be like whether it's a user ID, email, or any other piece. This is going to be the value, and this is going to be the regex for this evaluation. So in my parent flow, once this data type is created, now I can go in, go to my create data step. I'm going to create a list of that regex wrapper. This is going to be my test set. And I'll add an item. So key is going to be user ID, regex. Let's see. It's going to be this, and value is going to be 1, 2, 3. And I'll create a second one for email. The regex is going to be this, and we'll say that this is going to be Corey@decisions.com. We'll click OK. And now I will drag over that subflow that I made, and we'll have to make a few additions to it. well, first we'll drag over the for each step so that we can iterate through my test set list and have this go to the next path, to the done path. Now we'll edit that flow to perform the regex on. We'll set the input to be a single item of my regex wrapper. If I can find it. Sorry that my local environment is a little cluttered. I'll get rid of that. And my input is going to be from my item wrapper. It's going to be my value. And the pattern is going to be item wrapper.regex. And we'll close and save. We'll loop this back to my for each step. Set item wrapper to be item. Now we'll debug just to see how it evaluates. So now I can open up my first one and I can see, okay, what was the, all right, 1, 2, 3, it evaluated true against that pattern. And for the second iteration, Corey@decisions.com matches this regex pattern. Does that help answer your question here? So, awesome. Second part, how do I create the input array dynamically in my flow? So it depends where is the data coming from? Is it coming from a database? Is it coming from another source? So other than creating data this way, we can have, say, a fetch entity step, which is our generic database query abstraction step. So this would be where we could query from a database to pick up data definition or data that's stored within tables that Decisions has access to. We could use our REST integration steps to pull in data from other data sources. So if we had an API, we can define out, and maybe I can walk through that example. So creating a REST integration. So first, in a designer folder, I clicked on create data types integrations, add REST service. I can give this REST service a name. So I'm going to call it the lunch service. Define the URL. We'll say that this is going to be my test URL. And I can define if it has basic auth, Windows auth, used as an OAuth token. I can define out if it requires any additional headers to push information to or pull information from. And once I've defined my REST service, I can go in and I can add methods to that service. So if I wanted to say, add a post method or a get method to these different URL endpoints, and I can say that this is going to be, we'll just use what's populated there. So if I wanted to add any URL parameters, I could add them here. If I need to set something that's going to be configurable through a flow, I can set design time parameters as well. So this is going to be my, let's say, objects ID, painting number, so these are how we could build up query parameters or URL parameters within our different service to parameterize it such that when we click OK and build out this service method, it will create its own step within the toolbox that we can drag over and then have these variables as parameters to configure within the flow. So we have these, we can define it as a get step, and here we can define the step output type as a raw value. So if it's a RESTful JSON service that we're calling, it's going to return back the raw JSON. Or we can have a select data type. So if we know ahead of time and have the JSON type defined as a data type within decisions, we can say the result data type is going to come back in this format, and I just want the object back. I don't want to deal with deserializing the JSON from this REST call. I know the type that I'm looking to return back, and I can look to see, okay, in flow data, I can just have it as, say, I know that it's going to return this address to, and I know that it's going to be an array, or if it's going to be a single item of this object type. So with a lot of different ways of pulling back information. So can I use create data to populate the array? So create data is useful for when you want to have a single item mapping into, or when you want to create design time data. If we go back, now I understand your question. So when you have multiple items of one data type, but you want to map them over into a second data type, and I'm going to use, for the purpose of this example, I'm going to use this fetch entity step, but you could venture to, you can use your imagination here to say, this could be data coming from anywhere. It could be coming from an API call. It could be coming from an external database. It doesn't have to be coming from the decisions SQL backend that I'm pulling from here. But for the purpose of this example, on this fetch entity step, I'm going to be pulling accounts, and I'm going to be using a step called the list mapping step. So what this does is it's a very useful step that performs that using our mapping editor, we can use an ETL transformation of the data from one type into another. So we take one list type and transform it into another list type. So I'm going to take my inputs here. I'm going to have it as my inputs are going to be the outputs from my fetch entity step, which I've defined as accounts. And I'm going to have them as the entire object list for that account. My output type here is going to be a completely different list or a completely different data type, which for this example, I use as my regex evaluation wrapper. Now, if I click off that step, click back on the step, there's an option up here in orange called Show Item Mapping Editor. And what I can do within this mapping editor is on the left-hand side, you'll see __ input, and that's going to be a single item within my array. And if I open that up, I'll see all of its values within this data type. On the right-hand side, I'm going to see a regex evaluation wrapper, which is of the type that I'm building to. So if I wanted to have items built up in this right-hand list from this left-hand list, I can just drag over what pieces I wanted to find out here. And what's really powerful about this step is that it's not limited to the list that I'm pushing in. It has the concept of the data that's comes previous to it within the flow. So if I wanted to, I know that this is going to be the account ID, but maybe the key or the piece that I'm using is going to come from another area. Or I can define it as a constant to say, like, anything that's going to be added to this list from this particular step is going to be user ID. And this regex is going to be constant, and it's going to be what we had before here. So now I have that output of all of those types. And if I hook this step up to show you kind of more of a live example, I'm hooking it up to these outputs, which is the output from the list mapping step. So I'm taking all of the accounts, mapping those accounts into this regex evaluation wrapper. For each regex evaluation wrapper, I'm performing the regex on that item and evaluating if it succeeds or fails in that against that regular expression. So we'll see the first item in this row, system account, it doesn't fit that pattern. Second, guest account. So not many things fit that particular pattern of regex, but I hope that helped answer that question there a little bit more clearly. Awesome. Any other questions? Absolutely. We'll follow up with a recording of this Lunch and Learn today, and we'll make sure you get a copy. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, we can go ahead and conclude for today. Thank you all for joining. From Chesapeake, thank you for hopping on and having lunch with us.